What if the one moment you thought you understood, your entire life, your relationships, wasn't what you thought at all? What if someone you thought you knew, made you see yourself in a way you never expected? Stay tuned to hear how a simple weekend changed everything for Carol. I'm 54 years old. My name's Rachel. I've always considered myself a grounded woman. Not overly romantic, not the type to get swept away by silly notions of fate or passion. I married young, raised 2 children, and worked as a school secretary for most of my life. Stability was my compass. Love, to me, was quiet, dependable, and practical, like warm coffee on a cold morning. I never chased anything wild or unpredictable. That just wasn't me. But something happened last spring, something I never saw coming. I still don't know how to explain it, not fully. All I can say is this. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please don't make the same mistake I did. It all began on a quiet Friday evening. My cousin Donna had asked if I could watch her son Mason for the weekend. She and her husband were heading out of town for a wedding in Vermont, and their usual babysitter had canceled last minute. I didn't even hesitate. I adore Mason. He's 16 now, tall and polite, with a mop of sandy hair and the kind of awkward, sweet manner that reminds me of my own son when he was that age. They dropped him off around 6. Donna was in a rush, apologizing for the short notice, and Mason stood beside her, holding his overnight bag, offering a shy smile. Thank you so much, Rachel," Donna said, her keys already jangling in her hand. "He won't be any trouble, I promise." I waved them off with a warm smile, then turned to Mason. "You hungry?" He nodded, starving. Dinner was simple, pasta and garlic bread, and we ate at the kitchen table with the radio playing softly in the background. He told me about school, how he was trying out for the soccer team and how his math teacher was making his life miserable. I listened, genuinely interested, and noticed how much his voice had deepened since I last saw him over the holidays. After dinner, we watched a movie in the living room. It was something light, a comedy I picked that probably wasn't his favorite, but he didn't complain. He sat on one end of the couch. I sat on the other with my feet curled under me and a fleece blanket across my lap. It felt peaceful, like time had slowed down. At one point, I glanced over and caught him watching me just for a second. He looked away quickly, but the flicker of something, I don't know, curiosity maybe, stayed with me. I brushed it off. Teenagers are odd and unpredictable, and Mason had always been a thoughtful, introspective kind of boy. Around 10:30, I told him to head to the guest room upstairs. He thanked me, polite as always, and disappeared up the stairs with a sleepy yawn. I stayed downstairs for a while, sipping herbal tea and staring out the window at the dimly lit backyard. Something about the night air felt heavy, like it was carrying a secret. I went to bed just after midnight. I read a few pages from a paperback I'd been meaning to finish, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept drifting back to that look, the brief glance Mason had given me. There was nothing inappropriate about it. It was fleeting, innocent even, and yet it had stirred something in me I didn't expect. I shook it off and turned out the light. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought it was my imagination. I live alone, and the silence of my house is something I've grown so used to. But then I remembered Mason was staying over. I threw on my robe and walked downstairs barefoot, the hardwood floor cool against my feet. Mason was standing at the stove scrambling eggs. He was wearing one of my oversized flannel shirts, probably something he found in the laundry room after his spilled juice incident last night, and it hung loosely over his frame. The morning light poured through the window behind him, casting soft gold across his face and making him look older than 16, more grown than boyish. "Good morning," he said with a sheepish smile. "I figured I'd make you breakfast. You always used to cook for me when I was little." I smiled, touched in a way I couldn't quite explain. "That's very sweet of you." We sat and ate together. The quiet between us was comfortable but charged in a strange way. He asked me about my job, about whether I ever missed having kids in the house. I told him I did more than I let on, that sometimes the silence was a little too loud. He looked at me then, really looked, and said something that made my heart skip in my chest. "I always thought you seemed lonely, Aunt Rachel, even when I was a kid. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even blunt. It was said with genuine empathy, but it cut through me more deeply than I expected because he was right. I opened my mouth to say something, to laugh it off maybe, but the words caught in my throat. That moment, that strange quiet truth shared over eggs and morning sunlight, shifted something between us. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything. I spent the rest of that morning in a fog. Mason had gone outside to kick a ball around in the backyard while I cleaned up the dishes, but my hands moved on autopilot. My thoughts were spinning, not wildly, but slowly, like a carousel. I couldn't quite step off. His words echoed in my head. I always thought you seemed lonely. No one had ever said that to me out loud before. Not my ex-husband, not my kids, and certainly not a teenage boy who had once spoon-fed applesauce when he had a fever. Yet somehow Mason had seen it, had always seen it, even in his younger years. That truth unsettled me, not because it was unkind, but because it was so deeply accurate. When I finally stepped outside with 2 glasses of lemonade, he was lying on the grass in the patchy shade of the maple tree. His shirt was damp with sweat sticking to his back in places, and his hair was tousled. He looked peaceful, at ease. Just listen to the wind, the occasional chirp of birds. My backyard isn't much, just some flower beds, an old wooden fence, and the maple tree that's been there since I bought the house. But that morning, it felt like the safest place in the world. He turned toward me, suddenly serious. Wait, can I ask you something? I glanced at him. Of course. Were you ever in love? Like really in love? The question came out of nowhere, and I wasn't prepared for it. I paused, searching for an honest answer. I thought I was once, but now I'm not so sure. I think I confused safety with love, comfort with connection. He nodded like he understood more than he should have for someone his age. That makes sense. My mom and dad, they fight all the time, but they act like everything's fine around me. I guess people just pretend even when they're miserable. I looked at him then, this young man on the cusp of adulthood, full of insight and quiet hurt. It struck me how mature he was. Not in a showy, arrogant way, just thoughtful, observant. You're a good kid, Mason, I said gently. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I tried to be. Later that afternoon, we baked cookies together, a silly tradition I started years ago when he was still small enough to sit on my counter and sneak spoonfuls of dough. Now he was nearly my height, standing beside me at the kitchen island, his elbows dusted in flour, laughing as he accidentally dropped an egg on the floor. You're lucky I like you, I teased as I handed him a paper towel. You love me, he said with a grin. I laughed. You may be a little. That night, we ate dinner on the back porch. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything in soft peach and gold. Mason talked more than usual about his dreams, how he wanted to study architecture someday, how he felt like most people didn't really know him. I listened deeply and fully, and for the first time in years I felt seen, not as a caretaker or the reliable older cousin, but as a woman, a person with thoughts and dreams of her own. When it grew late, and the bugs started coming out, we went inside. He went upstairs to shower, and I stayed downstairs in the den, flipping through a photo album I hadn't touched in years. Old birthdays, family reunions, pictures of Mason as a toddler with cake on his face. One photo, him sitting in my lap, both of us smiling, made my chest ache. Time had passed so quickly. I hadn't even noticed how lonely I'd become until someone held a mirror up to it. He came down a while later, damp-haired and barefoot, wearing pajama pants and that same flannel shirt from the night before. He hesitated at the door. Hey, is it okay if I stay down here for a bit? I don't really feel like sleeping yet. Of course, I said. He sat at the far end of the couch, curled up with a throw pillow. We watched some quiet documentary on hummingbirds, not really watching, just letting the soft narration fill the silence. At one point I felt him glance at me. I didn't look back. A strange, unspoken energy hung between us, not dangerous, not inappropriate, but undeniably different. Eventually, he murmured, do you ever wish things had turned out differently? I turned my head. You mean in life? He nodded. Yeah, all the time, I said quietly. He didn't speak after that. We sat there for a long time, not talking, just being. And in that silence I felt something shift. Not a sudden spark or overwhelming revelation, but a slow unfolding, something emotional, intimate, unexpected, and I had no idea what it meant. The next morning came quiet. I woke up early, just after 6, the kind of early that comes naturally with age, before the alarm, before the birds even start singing. My house was silent again, just like it had been for years. Only now that silence felt heavier, not empty, but expectant somehow. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and padded into the kitchen. I started the coffee, moving with the kind of practiced rhythm that comes from decades of routine. But my mind wasn't on the steps. It was still wrapped around the night before. That moment on the couch, it hadn't been physical, not even close, but there was something in the way Mason had looked at me, in the questions he asked, in the softness between us that felt close. Too close maybe, yet not in a way that made me feel unsafe. It was confusing, stirring, and I wasn't sure what to do with any of it. When Mason came downstairs around 8, his hair still tousled from sleep, he looked at me with a quiet smile. "A morning," he said, his voice low and gravelly with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, handing him a mug of cocoa. "I thought you might like this." He took it with both hands. "Thanks, you always remember." We sat at the table without saying much. The sun spilled across the hardwood floor, and a breeze drifted in through the cracked window, bringing the smell of lilacs from the backyard. It was peaceful, and yet my chest felt tight. "I was thinking," Mason said after a long pause, "maybe we could go for a walk later. There's that trail by the river. I remember you used to take me there." I blinked, surprised by the memory. "You remember that?" Yeah. "You always packed snacks in that little blue cooler. And you'd tell me stories about the trees like they were people you knew." I smiled. "You always listened so closely." He shrugged. "I liked the way you talked back then. You made the world feel less scary." The way he said it with that gentle sincerity nearly undid me. I cleared my throat and nodded. "All right, let's go after breakfast." The trail was quiet when we arrived. Summer had just begun, and the trees were thick with green. The river beside the path whispered steadily, and sunlight streamed down in soft patches between the leaves. We walked side by side, not touching, not rushing. At one point, Mason picked a small white flower and handed it to me. I don't know what kind it is. Just thought it looked like you." I took it. Heart skipping, that's a strange thing to say. He smiled, and maybe, but I meant it. I didn't know how to respond, so I tucked the flower behind my ear and kept walking. About halfway through the trail, we found a bench overlooking the water. We sat down, and the silence between us stretched, not uncomfortable, but thick with things unsaid. Mason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I think I'm a little messed up. I don't know how to talk to people my age. I always feel like I'm pretending. But when I talk to you, I don't feel that way." His voice cracked slightly, and I turned to look at him. He wasn't crying, but his expression was vulnerable, like he peeled something back and wasn't sure how I'd react. "Oh, Mason," I said gently, "you're not messed up. You're just feeling things deeply. That's not a flaw, it's rare." He glanced at me, searching my face. "You really think so?" "You really think so?" Long pause before he said so quietly I almost missed it. "You make me feel safe, Rachel, but also like I'm not invisible." That stayed with me the rest of the walk. When we got back to the house, the air between us had changed. Not awkward. Not yet, but undeniably more charged. He helped me put away the picnic things, and his hand brushed mine, lingering just a moment too long, and still neither of us spoke of it. That evening, as the sun set behind the maple tree, we sat on the back steps with mugs of tea. Mason was quiet again, staring at the sky. "I don't want to leave tomorrow," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "You miss your parents?" No," he said quickly. "I mean, yeah, I guess, but that's not why." He turned toward me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of everything he hadn't said gathering in his eyes. There was a depth there I wasn't prepared for, a longing I didn't know how to hold. I stood then, suddenly aware of how close we were. "It's getting late. We should turn in." He nodded slowly, watching me the whole time. "Yeah, okay." As I walked inside, I could feel his gaze on my back. I closed my bedroom door gently behind me, heart racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking of Mason's words, his expressions, the moments between us that didn't feel like coincidence anymore. I was trying to make sense of something that had crept up so quietly, so unexpectedly. I didn't even realize it was there until I was in the middle of it. And deep down, I knew something had changed. Not just in him, in me. I didn't come out of my room until nearly 9 the next morning. The house was still, not silent. I could hear the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen, but there was a stillness that felt heavier than usual. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, staring at the floor, my hands folded in my lap, like I was waiting for something. Maybe permission, maybe a sign. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, Mason was already downstairs. He had packed up his things neatly by the door, his overnight bag zipped shut, shoes lined up with care. He was standing at the kitchen counter pouring cereal into a bowl, his posture straight, his face unreadable. He looked up when I walked in. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely there. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the opposite counter. We didn't speak for a moment. Just the sound of a spoon stirring, the soft hum of the fridge. Then Mason set his spoon down and looked at me, his eyes a little brighter than they should have been. "I wanted to say thank you," he said, "for this weekend, for everything." "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "You've always been welcome here." He hesitated. "I know, but it felt different this time." I nodded slowly. It was that silence again. It stretched out long and thin like a piece of thread about to snap. And then he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Did I do something wrong?" The question hit me straight in the chest. I shook my head quickly, stepping closer. "Oh no, Mason. No, you didn't." "Because it feels like something happened, or almost happened, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable." I don't know what this was. His voice cracked at the end, and he looked down, ashamed, confused, maybe even scared. And in that moment, everything inside me ached for him, for his honesty, for his vulnerability, for the fact that no one had probably ever made space for him to feel what he was feeling. I stepped forward and gently reached out, placing my hand on his arm. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were kind, thoughtful, honest, and yes, something shifted. I felt it too." He looked up at me, hopeful and unsure. "But I need to be the one to name it, to hold it properly," I continued gently. I took a breath, studying myself. "Mason, you're still growing into who you are. And I'm not who you think I am. I'm not this woman who has it all figured out. I'm lonely, yes, but loneliness can trick you into thinking a moment means more than it should." He swallowed hard, but it meant something, didn't it? I nodded. It did. It absolutely did. He reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a very long time, that I matter, that someone sees me, and that means the world to me. He stepped back, his jaw tightening, then relaxing again. "So what do we do now?" "We take what this was and carry it with care," I said. "We don't pretend it didn't happen, but we don't try to